Hey, gentlemen, how you doing?
Fine, sir. Hope you're having a good night.
Hasn't really started yet.
I see we have Deputy Commissioner Close in the. Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
let's promote her.
all right, I'll let you handle this, Peter. You got it.
Okay, yeah, depending on how many residents we get, if it is like last time, we only have a few, then I'm only gonna, I'll promote all of them. But if oh, good, Alan's with us.
And just remember also that when you do that, be a little bit careful during, if you're taking public comment, you can of course allow those people who are not really the board to make public comment during those times as well.
Say that again, sorry.
So for example, like this morning, in this morning's meeting, Deborah Guthrie was there, and
Yeah.
Deborah is not anything more than a public member at this point. So it would have been perfectly acceptable for her to make a public comment, even though there
Oh,
was nobody else. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I get you. Okay, thanks though. Sure. Hi, everybody that's on so far. This is Peter in the Department of Community Planning and Development. Thanks for attending. My philosophy, I think, is going to be we'll see how many people we get in the participants, non-township or drain office folks. And if it's not overwhelming, we can promote them all as panelists, or we may just leave some of them in the crowd, I'll call it, the attendees, and promote them when they have a question or just turn their mics on. So if you find yourself as an attendee, please understand you'll get a couple chances to ask questions if you have them. Hello, Clerk-elect Guthrie.
Hello, how are you this evening?
Doing well. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So at 6 o'clock, I think out of respect for everybody's time, we ought to get rolling. So I see a handful of people just to try to keep the screens. Well, first of all, everybody, thanks for coming. I think we all know each other. My name's Peter Menser. I'm the principal planner in our Department of Community Planning and Development. We have a lot of people on the call today. I've been calling these calls. I don't know what else to do. So we have our team here. We have some representatives from the Ingham County Drain Office, which we are greatly appreciative of their time and joining us this evening to answer questions. So what you're seeing on the screen, I've promoted everybody that kind of either township or drain staff. I'm going to leave some of you in the attendees slots, and if you have questions, raise your hand. Like I see Larry and Kathy have their hand up now. Hopefully you know how to use the raise hand icon. You can find it if you just poke around through the participants page here. So we've all gathered here tonight to talk about the drainage at Champion Woods, Woods of Heron Creek. As you're all well aware, there was a condition in the rezoning related to drainage, and it basically stated that the developers of the project of Silverleaf, which is the planned unit development that's currently under consideration by our township board, that the developers of Silverleaf would participate in doing and resolving issues at Champion Woods. So obviously it's a little loosely worded, probably purposely so. And what we have done in the last couple of days is gathered some township staff. So myself, Assistant Township Director Derek Perry, Director of Community Planning and Development Mark Kieselbach, and a representative from the neighborhood, which I understand, I think is the president of the neighborhood of Champion Woods, at least, Dan McCole and Larry McCurdy, along with several staff from the Ingham County Drain Commissioner's Office, all met out at the end of Sophia Parkway and walked around the site to get an idea of on the ground, what's it look like on the ground, what are the issues that we're going to be dealing with here. And I can't thank the Drain Commissioner's Office enough for taking the time to join us and lending your expertise to what is a very complicated situation, and definitely a topic that the township, we don't have a team of experts on drainage. I think all of us know enough about it, but we certainly lean heavily and respect the jurisdiction of the Drain Office in situations like this. So as we move forward, you know, typically what we do with these projects is we condition our approvals on any approvals from the Drain Office. So nothing gets approved through the township without the stamp of the Drain Commissioner's Office. So you can all feel somewhat comfortable knowing that nothing's going to proceed forward unless it's been absolutely reviewed, signed off, approved by the Drain Office. So that being said, what I wanted to do tonight, and try to keep it as least free form as possible, but I wanted to provide a very brief explanation of kind of what we've done today. I'm hoping that Carla, who I see is on the call from the Drain Office, will be willing to provide a summary of what she understood as some of the primary issues. And I'm hoping Dan McCole would be willing to do the same. So if we could start with Carla. Carla Clos is the Deputy Drain Commissioner for Ingham County. I don't know your whole bio, so I won't try to do that, Carla, but if you wouldn't mind chiming in on our meeting. Oh, I see Commissioner Lindeman is here as well.
Yes, and
So,
I think it would be appropriate to start with Commissioner Lindeman, and I'll chime in after him.
thank you. I just didn't see him on the call. So thanks, Pat. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you being here tonight.
Yeah, not a problem. So what is it you'd like to know?
Well, I'm hoping your team was able to provide a summary of our visit on Tuesday afternoon on the site.
Okay.
And what we're looking for, I guess, is a summary of from your perspective, what are the primary issues that need to be tackled? From my perspective, we were able to see, I think, really one length of drain that needs to either be repaired or right-sized. I don't even use the right terminology. So that's what I'm hoping is you can at least identify the scope of the issue for the
Sure.
residents or in attendance here tonight.
Okay. Well, the drain in question has a section in it that was built in 1880s, and it's a butt joint tile, which is in constant need of repair. It's a very small tile. It was actually designed for moving water off of an agricultural field. And now you have subdivisions all around it that dump into it, and it just isn't big enough for the volume. There's a small section of it, I can't remember how many feet it is, but it should be upsized to at least an 18-inch. In order for that to happen, that size of pipe, for a drain improvement to take place, it requires a petition, and then we can move ahead and improve the, hang on just a minute, I'll turn my phone off. Okay, it has to be, it's considered an improvement to upsize that pipe. So it has to be done with a petition. The other issue is the new development that's going in next door. We don't have final drawings on that development, but I can assure you that my standards will be strictly met when that does come through. And my staff will look at it and make sure that it meets all of our stormwater standards. They're going to have to retain all the 100 years worth of water. They're going to have a place to put it. They're going to have a place to store it so it does no harm to anybody. They're also going to be required to hold back the first 2 inches of water, or excuse me, the first 1 inch of water for a pre-developed or for a pre-treatment purposes, so that the pollution that leaves that area will not be part of the water stream that winds up in the Heron Creek. Does that answer your question?
I think, Pat, if I could add this, Carla Clos, when we walked, I think, Peter, you asked as sort of a summary from the walk, and I think Pat did an excellent summation of the approach from the drain office. What we learned from the walk, and very appreciative to both the township in showing the leadership for setting up that meeting and reaching out to the neighborhood to make it happen, and also to the neighborhood for stepping forward and giving us a wonderful tour from their perspective of the changes in the watershed over the time period, at least, that the folks that we walked with have experienced it. And the biggest takeaway that I had from that was, I mean, we already knew that we had an old tile and that vitrified clay tile. I mean, they at best are about a 70 to 100 year lifespan, and we're pushing it now, as Pat said. That was installed sometime in the 1800s, back when there was township drainage, and it was turned over to us as a county, and even before the railroad asked for a crossing. So I mean, you know how old it is, and but everything has accelerated in a more recent period of time as the land uses have changed. The infrastructure hasn't kept up with the land use changes, and I think that's what Pat was introducing as the topic. And this is no different in this watershed than we see we see in many places in the county. And what this says is we need to look at this infrastructure to make sure that it can accommodate not only the development that's existing and the changes that Champion Woods and the Woods of Heron Creek have experienced, but also to handle any future development. We need to make sure that this infrastructure can accommodate it, because the drain office doesn't make those land use decisions. Those are made by the township. And it's our responsibility to make sure that our infrastructure can handle it. And if it can't handle it, that those petitions, that we make sure that the improvements are made, if by petition or by a developer, if they're asking for changes in the land use, that we have the proper infrastructure in place to accommodate them. So there's no detriment either upstream, and by upstream, that would be Champion Woods and Woods of Heron Creek, or downstream, and that would be anybody who owns land north of these properties along the Heron Creek, because the outlet will be the Heron Creek down to the Red Cedar. And so we look at that very carefully when they submit for a drainage and site plan review, which they haven't yet done. We've only done the conceptual review, which has been really a courtesy to the township to emphasize what Drain Commissioner Lindeman said, which is they will be held to our standards. And that includes phase 2 standards for water quality as well as water quantity, to make sure there is no detriment upstream or downstream, and that the proper infrastructure is in place to accommodate it. The take home from the walk that we went on was that this vitrified clay tile, the butt joint clay that Pat was talking about, is it's beyond its life. It's you know, we start seeing blowouts. We start seeing the tile that's sitting on top of the ground. It's no longer even in the ground, so it's not even at the elevation it would need to be to serve the proper drainage. And so that was one take home, that this old tile is beyond its useful life. And what we could do is to replace it, but we can only replace it with a 12-inch. And we have on the phone or on the Zoom meeting tonight, Alan Boyer from LSG Engineers, who was on the site visit with us, who has been a consulting engineer in the past on the Hoskins drain, and also Angie Cosman, who is the drain office engineer. And you know, I'll let them speak to the issue of a 12-inch tile serving, you know, several hundred properties in a, you know, subdivision. But the other take home was, and this is what we learned from the neighborhood and why it was so important to go on the walk with folks who have been there and had some of the first houses in Champion Woods. And that is the changes that they have seen over the course of, you know, less than 2 decades. They have seen the changes in the water levels in the wetlands. And of course, the old Hoskins drain, and maybe, I don't know, Alan, if you can throw up on the screen, I don't know if you would be allowed to share the screen, but we do have the Hoskins drain route and course, which runs right through the low areas, which is to say the wetlands in Champion Woods, as well as the woods of Heron Creek. And what they have seen is that those wetlands are holding water, more water, and for longer periods of time. And the concern, at least as was expressed to us on the walk, and certainly that we've had experience with at the drain office, is with volume changes of water in the wetlands, they can change the character of the wetlands from essentially a wooded wetland. The trees start dying off, and then you have a real loss of important values to the neighborhoods. And what that was telling us was what we had some physical evidence of the failure of this drain, is that these wetlands, they have no real outlet for the overflow of water, so that it just is accumulating there, and eventually it will go into the soils. But until that point, it'll stand there for a long periods of time, and that is a concern that I think that does need to be addressed. Otherwise, we're going to inadvertently have a real change of character of the wetlands in those areas, from what are essentially wooded and emergent wetlands to just open bodies of water. So Alan, I see you've got the drainage, the Hoskins drain, and that might help folks sort of appreciate what we're talking about. And Alan, maybe it would be appropriate now, I could turn this over to you and Angie as engineers to explain a little bit about what you saw as an engineer, your perspective.
Sure. So hopefully everybody can hear me, and I'm having difficulty getting control of my computer here. But what I'm showing is the fact that the Hoskins drain map that is being shown here identifies the area that's drained by the Hoskins drain, which is the black or dashed line. The heavy blue line, or let me back up. The light blue line that's on the left-hand side of the drawing is the Heron Creek drain, and that's the outlet for the Hoskins drain. The heavier blue line, or the darker blue line, the solid line, is the Hoskins drain. And it's the drain that was established in 1886, as Pat pointed out. The smaller dashed lines that adjoin the heavy line, in other words, the heavy line that is the Hoskins drain, as it was established in 1886, is this line that I'm tracing here. And part of it is tile. These other lines that are adjoining it are drains that have been established as branches of the Hoskins drain as part of the developments that have taken place. The specific location that Pat referred to, that's the tile drain, which is essentially the restriction in the system, is right in this area right here, crossing this pathway that the owners out there have probably walked, and we walked the other day. That's a tile drain that the drain office has repaired on numerous occasions. But all of the flow from most of this district and the area that's tributary to it, all is attempting to follow this flow path to try to get through that tile. And certainly, in 1886, for what the drainage was necessary for the landowners that were out there to try to live on and farm the land, that may have been an appropriate tile size. Now that we have residential development and the school bus garage and various other entities that are in the drainage district that generate runoff into the wetland, it's likely not the appropriate size. That's certainly, I think, one of the things that the landowners expressed when we were out there, is that the additional presence of water, as Carla noted, was changing the character of the wetland, partly from the point of view that it was raising the elevation of the water, and certainly that is a volume issue. We have more reason for water to run off with roofs and streets and parking lots and pavements. But also because of the presence of water, the character was changing in that, trees that were healthy trees that are now standing out there and with wet feet all the time are beginning to die. And that is in part a reason for the additional, or resulting from the additional water, but it's also in part related to the fact that the water simply cannot get away through the drainage system that's there. Carla, does that address what you wanted me to talk about?
Yeah, and I think, the difference between rate and volume, that when we size detention basins, those are sized to hold the development runoff to pre-development runoff rates, not necessarily volume. And that's a big issue that is changing the character not only of wetlands, but of our aquatic resources generally. The Heron Creek, the Red Cedar River are carrying as a capacity a larger volume, which are, the drain office has, since our standards in 2005, has begun to address those, and most standards now are addressing to try and manage to some extent that volume that comes off, recognizing that takes a toll on the aquatic resources downstream, and it can cause erosion. And Pat, this is really his area of expertise, not mine. And I don't know, Pat, just maybe you might want to explain some of the changes that can
Sure.
occur to a river system with that added volume.
Mm-hmm. Well, years ago when the drains were built, most of the drains were built between the Civil War and sometime around 1940. And we have new subdivision drains and stuff that have gone in that have added to those drains. But when they first built the drains in Michigan, they were not concerned with additional volumes of water. Just as an example, on Farm Lane Bridge on MSU's campus, it used to be in 1905, I have a picture of it, you could get a running head start and almost jump across the river. Today you cannot. The whole Red Cedar system has been blown out, widened, and has become not the same river system that it was in the 1800s. And that is because we have kept adding more and more volume to come off the land. Now, in the 1950s, we really started to look at, land use planners and so on have started to look at, drainage managers and engineers have started to look at the volume of water, the rate of flow of water. And they thought it's all okay as long as the water is running off the land at a rate at which it would have run off in a pre-developed state, if the land was held in a pre-developed state. Well, that might be fine and good, but all in all, what used to take days to run off is now running off in a day and a half. And it has more volume to it. It might have the same rate of flow, but it has 2 or 3 times the volume that it used to have, which overwhelms everything downstream. So these wetlands are stressed because of that very issue. Our standards in the last 10 years have concentrated on trying to hold back the water and not only get new development to hold back the rate of flow, but also revert back to the rate or to the volume of flow. And if we can do that, you can stabilize the Red Cedar ecosystem, so on and so forth. And wetlands within neighborhoods like this one would be more stable, they'd last longer, they'd be healthier, and so on and so forth. Well, that's what our standards are today. And we will hold this new development to those standards. The development that took place to created this subdivision was not subject to those standards. But all new developments will probably have to come as close as they can to reducing the volume leading to the rate of flow. Does that explain? I hope it explains it a little bit.
Yeah, no, that was
There's a
perfect.
big difference between the volume and the rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
there's
the
a big
big
difference.
issue that when we walked the site is from the neighborhood's perspective is the concern, again, because their outlet is the Hoskins. My understanding from what Peter and Mark had explained was the new development has a plan to go directly to the Heron Creek. Again, our office has not received anything for drainage or site plan review, but this is what we've been told. But which is good because clearly the capacity of the Hoskins drain at 12 inches, I mean, we're over capacity of it probably with the development and Champion and the existing to date development, and probably would not be able to handle anything more, certainly at a 12-inch capacity, which is what's out there now. But as you see, and Alan, could you flag the drainage district there for the Hoskins Creek,
So
for the
the,
Hoskins drain?
so the black line here, the dashed black line that I'm tracing around the perimeter is the drainage district. And that defines the area that is the district that's liable for assessment. And it also describes the area that's tributary to the drain. So a drop of water that falls within the boundary of the black line ultimately finds its way to the blue lines and out to this point into Heron Creek.
With any luck, if the tile isn't as bad as it is.
Right.
But the important thing to note there with that district is, as you can see right now, part of the land in the proposed development of Silverleaf right now is within that Hoskins Creek drainage district, which means when, prior to, I know there've been some modifications in that land because there was some sand mining going on at one point, but to the extent that the land has its original grade, it would have drained to that tile or to the Hoskins drain. Now, if the new development is planning on going directly to the west to the Heron Creek, that's fine. It will be reviewed according to the capacity in the Heron Creek and what they propose, but that boundary would have to change because right now we have it showing that they would drain in part of their land anyway up to the Hoskins drain, and I don't think that's what they have in mind, and certainly at this point we would not want them to go to the Hoskins drain because, as we know, we're already having some drainage issues within the existing subdivisions. So to add water into the Hoskins drain would take up whatever little capacity there is in that 12-inch. So that would be something and was identified in that conceptual review letter that was sent to the township, that the lands currently are in part of it directly in the Heron Creek. Of course, it's all essentially Heron Creek because the Hoskins is tributary to the Heron Creek, but how it gets to the Heron Creek is very important. Does it go directly there, or is it going to go through the Hoskins drain and get to the Heron Creek? And I think, as we now know, because there are problems with the Hoskins drain, and there's certainly evidence of that wetland being overwhelmed right now, because that drain isn't working very well. We wouldn't want anything more to go in there. We wouldn't want to exacerbate what we already know are growing problems over there, at least according to the neighborhood and the evidence of looking at the watermarks out there. There's pretty good evidence that that wetland has floods much deeper than even we saw it when we were walking. And it does raise the importance within this whole watershed, not only the Hoskins, but the Heron Creek, how important all the wetlands are, because those wetlands are part of, when we look at these systems and watersheds, we look at the water budget and where's all the water going. It raises the importance of all wetlands within both the Heron Creek and the Hoskins system, because we know there are limitations within those systems, certainly the ones we talked about with Hoskins, but the Heron Creek also has its own limitations because downstream there's a railroad that crosses over, and we don't really know to what extent water may be backing up. We do know that the wetland upstream or of the railroad tracks appears to be getting wetter and wetter as well. So it may be that there's some elevation problems with the crossing at the railroad, or it just may be a strictly a volume issue like we're seeing in the Hoskins system. So that does require some more looking into on the engineers looking into that to give us better technical advice on what we need to do to make sure that everything can be accommodated as the township is reviewing the land use decisions that they want to make.
Yeah, I'd just like one more thing that I'd like to say here. This is Pat Lindeman. The new development will be held to the new standards, of course, and the 1-inch first flush, which probably within a year and a half will be a 2-inch first flush. But that really means that 1 inch will never leave that whole area with the first flush capability built into their system. And in terms of numbers of storms, probably somewhere around 65% of all storms are 1 inch or less. 90% are 2 inches or less in this region. So with a 1 inch first flush, this development should be built to be able to retain and never let go of 1 inch of water. That's the purpose of our first flush standard. That was not in place when the Champion Woods was built. So we will make sure that if they do go to Heron Creek, they're still going to be held to that 1 inch reduced flow off of their land, but they'll be taking all of their water from the eastern part of their property away from the Hoskins Creek if they take it to the Heron Creek. And so that's going to relieve a lot of pressure off of that. But we really should, that 12-inch should be increased to at least an 18-inch. So if that is any helpful to the conversation.
And then just one final thing about that, when Pat says increase to 18-inch, that is not to say anything about this is set up to drain the wetlands. The wetlands are a very important part of the water budget in these watersheds. It is just to take that additional volume off the overflow, so to speak, that might need to come off of the land, and to make sure we have the right size of the pipe that can accommodate. And again, it's up to the township, and we look to the township, of course, makes the land use decisions. Our role in the drain office is to make sure that you have the best information from us on the kind of infrastructure, either changes or modifications that need to be made to support the decisions that you're making, so that there's no detrimental impact either to the existing development or any future development. So we just want to make sure we're getting you the best advice as you're making the decisions you want to make on the land use.
Yeah, well, thank you. We really do appreciate that. Alan, do you mind dropping your screen?
Not at all.
Thank you. And thanks for having that available to us. It was really helpful. So, okay, we've heard from the drain office, and they're gonna stay with us. I've noticed some comments in the chat. So, which is, you can make the comments, but let's make sure that we can have those, make those same comments so that everybody can see them, because I'm sure there are points that everybody here wants to hear. So what I think we ought to do now, unless anyone on the township has anything to say to start with here, but let's, Dan Nicole, do you have any observations you wanted to share before we go to kind of just neighborhood questions, since we have all the right team members here?
No, I think, Alan and Carla summarized what I heard during the tour anyway, as far as the process for, starting it with a petition and, how it would work out in the drain district. I have a few questions, but we can hold off on those until we get to that section.
Okay. Well, I think at this time it'd be appropriate to take questions from all of you that have attended from the neighborhood. And again, we appreciate you being here. I see two hands, so hopefully all of you know how to use the raise hand feature. I'm going to utilize that in calling on people just to have some sort of sense of order. So if you don't find that your question is being answered, please raise your hand and we will get to you. So the first person I'd like to call on is Lawrence Drzal. So let me get Lawrence up here. I'll play DJ and give everybody the talking. So Lawrence, you've got a microphone. You'll need to unmute yourself, and then you're on with the crew here.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just an observation and a question, I guess, for Alan. On the map that showed the layout of the Hoskins Drain, I've walked that pathway. Well, I guess I should tell you where I'm from. I'm from the woods of Heron Creek, 4259 Shadow Ridge. And so my property borders on the east, the end of our property borders on the east side of the drainage area we're talking about. And then I have two neighbors next to me, north of me, the Butlers and the Mears. And then Creekstone crosses east-west there. So have an idea where we are. And I've walked in the back and walked the pathway that Alan referred to. And the thing that struck me is that there's a drainage pipe that I saw, but it looked to be metal, not clay. And is there more than one drainage pipe underneath that walkway?
Well, there likely could be. It's not unusual for landowners, particularly in places like this, to put in culverts to cross the driveways. The specific one that we looked at, obviously, was the Hoskins Drain, which is, that blue line that I showed on the map. And
right.
But there likely could be others.
Well, the reason I ask is that as I walked down the pathway south towards Champion Woods, I came across a drain underneath that pathway. That pathway is elevated and it actually separates an area where there's a wetland on the west side, and on the east side is the area that's gotten very wet since we've been here. It was much drier before that time. And that's what my concern is, because in the spring when the rains come up, the water creeps up into our property, and it just finally dried out a couple of weeks ago. And,
can I answer part of that?
Well, let me finish describing that.
Okay.
Let me finish describing that, Pat.
Sure, Lawrence.
And so when I looked at that metal drain, which looks to be a 12-inch drain, is located very high. It's near the surface of that walkway. And when I went there during wet areas, it was not low enough to connect the water in the wetlands behind my property on the east side of the pathway versus the wetlands on the west side of the pathway. And so I'm wondering whether there are two different things there, whether that one is responsible or not. But it seems to me that a simple solution would be that whoever put that drain in there located it too high. And all they need to do is come in with a backhoe and dig it up and move it down a foot. And it might alleviate some of the problems that we're facing. That's all
This is Pat Lindeman again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion. But a lot of those tubes, those metal tubes, are put in by private citizens or landowners. When the path was put in, it was an equalizing tube. And there's probably more than one or two in there. There's probably about 3 or 4 of them that go along that. And they usually put them up a little bit higher so that they have to reach a certain head height of water from one side to the other. Mostly when they put them in, they're typically just landowners that put them in. They have no survey equipment or anything to measure the invert of those pipes, but they put them in a way that is meant to just keep the path dry, not to do any other function. It's not to regulate water within the watershed or anything else. It's just more or less an equalizing tube from one side of the path to the other. It helps the path maintain its integrity instead of washing out. And it's not uncommon for us to see dozens of those along a pathway.
Okay. Do you know when that pathway was put in? We moved into our house in 2003, and I believe Stirk owned the property, before that time. And College Fields was built, or Champion Woods was built, sometime later than we were in there. Was that pathway in there as early as 2003, or was it constructed when they, as an emergency roadway or something, when they put in Champion Woods?
No, I think that path was there long before that. It's very similar to a lot of the logging trails that you'll see up north. And if you look at the logging trails, they all have equalizing tubes in the low spots. And they just put them in for convenience so that the road doesn't blow out. So that when the water pressure on one side gets higher than the other, it just equalizes on both sides. And it's not uncommon to see those. They don't do any typically that I know of anyway, they don't do any measurements or surveys or hire an engineer to figure out what the invert should be and all of that. They're just simply put there to protect the path from blowing away in high water.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks like we have Norman Granneman next. So let me go through it'll just take a second, sorry. Let me disable Lawrence. Find Norman. Okay, Norman, you've been granted speaking privileges. If you could share your questions with us. And I saw you had a couple comments in the chat, if you wouldn't mind summarizing those as well.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Thanks for having this meeting. This is very informational and a good meeting. Thank you, Pat and Carla, for joining us. I have a couple of questions, some of which I've already put in the chat. One is, I walked the drain, part of the drain anyway, the part between Champion Woods and Woods at Heron Creek, where I live at 2628 Creekstone Trail. I was surprised to find, and Carla mentioned this too, I think, that there was some vitrified clay tile broken in the area between a couple of the places where water backs up. So one of my questions is, did there used to be this vitrified clay pipe running for quite some distance, or is it only was it only running under the pathway that Larry was talking about?
I can answer that in part, and then Carla can also contribute. But it's not unlikely that almost all of that land where both those subdivisions were under-tiled by the people that performed agriculture on it.
Right.
Farmer fields they put tiles in to keep the roots of their crops dry, and they aren't very deep. And a lot of times you'll see those tiles pop up. They aren't part of the county drain sometimes, and sometimes they are. But the clay tile that we're talking about is right in line with the drawing that Alan.
Yes. Okay. And I know what
Neighborhoods will. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say that a lot of times neighborhoods begin to flood, and it's not due to any failure in the drain. It's due to the farm tile that just finally quit working.
Right.
You know, and that happens sometimes too.
Right. And so I would like to say one thing about the tile going under the pathway. I agree that that is probably improperly placed in order to drain the water coming off of upland of it. But that's not the only place where there is an obstruction in the drain that causes water to back up into the neighborhoods. And in particular, there's a fairly significant area pretty much right behind the Drzal's house where the land surface is high enough that it's backing water up significantly. And if that used to be drained by an agricultural drain, then that would sort of explain why there were fairly mature trees growing in a healthy way until the tile failed and the drainage no longer worked. The other thing I'd like to say is related to Alan's map. First of all, and I think Carla tried to get at this too. There are actually two different drains. In fact, we get two bills from you, Pat. Thank you very much. We get a bill for the Heron Creek drain and a bill for the Hoskins drain, both. They are actually separate drains, or at least they're billed separately, even though they eventually flow together. And
one is a foster child of the other.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
But one thing I would like to say to you, Alan, is I don't believe any water from the north side of the railroad comes into Hoskins Drain. And on your map, it shows that to be the case. So I think that is incorrect. And I think you should also really distinguish on that map between what is part of the Heron Creek Drain and what is actually the Hoskins Creek Drain or the Hoskins Drain. So I would suggest that little modification as well. I too walked the area this afternoon, and I could see where you all had walked that area earlier. So it was a good experience to see it. But two things surprised me. First of all, was seeing the old destroyed clay drains sitting on the surface in places. And secondly, what a large area there was that was causing water to back up. And a lot of that water that backs up is coming from Champion Woods. Okay, any questions for me? I'll try to answer them. Also, Alan, you're showing the whole of Hoskins Creek Drain as being an open drain, whereas we know it's not an open drain when it goes under the pathway. So that should be changed on your map. And secondly, Pat, I don't know how you describe a drain as being a 12-inch drain when it's actually an open drain. Is that the capacity of the drain is equal to a 12-inch pipe, or what? How do you do that?
The size of the original pipe from the 1800s was 12 inches.
Okay.
And that's just it, you know.
But everything is open except for the tile or the pipe that goes under the pathway. Everything is open now, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of cleaning that has to be done in the ditch areas and within the pipe construction too. There's a bunch of stuff that's wrong with that, and it needs it's in need of repair. But if we have a petition, we're allowed to increase the capacity of the drain, And we will increase it so that we take what we consider to be a rate of flow back to protect the integrity of those wetlands as you remember them, not the new harm that's done to them because of the backing up of the water. But that may require a different sizing of the pipes from the 1800s.
Right.
And all of the farm tile that's been abandoned, we don't have any seeking. It has to somehow make its way to the registered drain, the established drain for the county. And
Right.
once that's done, we can certainly help it get there. But there's a lot of parts of that that are probably broken that we don't even know about. So
Yeah.
we'll do a thorough investigation. If we had a petition, we'd do a thorough investigation on the whole system.
Excellent. Well, thank you for doing this. We really appreciate your interest.
Thanks, Norm. Really appreciate your questions. And certainly any other, a lot of the detailed stuff, doesn't have to be the end of this conversation. Be happy to share the names and numbers of the drain office staff that's on the call tonight if you want to take up this conversation in the future. I wanted to follow up really briefly with, there was someone in the chat that I haven't seen raise their hand, Ming Han Lee. You had a couple of questions in the chat if you were, oh, I see your hand. Perfect, thank you, good timing. So let's find her. Let me disable Norman. Okay, Minhan, you're on if you want to share your
Okay.
question with the group.
Thank you, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes. I'd appreciate, Patrick, you shared that the total volume is still increased, even though we try to control the flow rate, right? But then,
Correct. That's correct.
yeah, and so future development. So for your information, I lived in 4335 Aztec Way. So if you look at the Hopkins Creek in the middle of that, and that's an open space, I'm right at the north of that open space in the middle of the Hopkins Creek, Aztec Way.
Okay.
We moved in here about 2.5 years ago. At that time, the pond, I would call it a pond, that's poorly drained now I know, has standing water most of the time. And right now, this pond or the depressed area is somehow dry and wet. And so we get to see its fluctuation. So if the future development south of my area, looking at the solid line of Hopkins Creek, I believe the area south of Bennett, what is the field? College Fields, and that development maybe has reached its maturity. So maybe no further impermeable surface will be added to that. And looking at the Bennett Wood Elementary School, and I'm hoping the Bennett Wood Elementary School will not continue to grow in a much larger scale, which means that no further impermeable surface will be added. Now, the new development, they may have entry from the Bennett Wood near the Hopkins Creek area, Hopkins Drain, then adding into this Hopkins Creek in the future. So what I'm saying here is only if we put in a stricter development requirement, which means that no increase of total volume, no increase of total flow rate. Otherwise, coming from the Bennett Wood solid line, the Hopkins Creek, all the way to the west side, draining into the Heron's Creek, that total solid line drainage will have increased total volume and maybe also the flow rate. So that's just my concern, and I'd like that provided to the committee here.
I can answer part of that. In terms of the total volume of water because of new development, we have instituted a 1 inch, and that's the first 1 inch of all storm events. And somewhere around 65% of all storm events are 1 inch or less. And if we can get new development according to today's standards to hold back that 1 inch and never release it, that's a great amount of volume that is never going to leave that site. So they have to find ways to handle it within the development. We are the state, actually, in the Midwest. Most of the rules will be up to 2 inches rather than 1 inch. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can do that. You increase impoundments is one easy way, but the better way is a lot of low impact design elements scattered throughout your development. And you can move a lot of water and retain a lot of water and reduce the flow in a lot of ways by using different tools within the toolbox of low impact design. And there are hundreds of different ways to do it. So our office will require them to actually move less water than it does now if they do put in a development. And it will always be at the rate of flow that precedes that. So it would be a pre-developed rate of flow with a reduction in the volume. In about 2 years, we're probably within a year and a half or so, I think we're probably going to have a 2 inch first flush value added to our rules. So
Thank you, Patrick. Who
Okay.
make the decision of 1 inch? Could it be
I
1.5
do.
or 2?
I
So
do.
that,
It could be 1 or 2. Yes.
yeah,
It can be more
So-
than that, but
yeah, could be more than that. And so
Yeah.
it adds some factor of safety into it, so that we will have less concern about the future development. Thank you,
that's
Patrick.
right. Thank you.
Okay, I see the McCurdy's have their hands up, so we're gonna get to the McCurdy's here in a second. Sorry, getting there. Okay, Kathy and Larry, thanks for joining us.
Okay,
please share your questions with the group.
you can hear? Okay. First of all, would like.
Kathy and Larry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me now?
Yep, we can
Okay.
hear you.
All right, good. First of all, the elevation of the drain, with you putting the 18 inch, if that 18 inch could go in basically below where the tile is now, that would really look good from what we can see in our backyard. Okay, so I don't know, I'm sure you don't have numbers yet, but we would certainly like to see that elevation go down. Carla mentioned something about that, but I just wanted to get it specific.
So Peter, I realized I can't raise my hand. I think that's because of the status you have me under. Can I just ask a couple things?
Yes, please.
Yeah, just real quick with Lawrence, I actually thought that drain was metal too until I went through it the other day. My memory of it was that it was metal and it was actually clay, at least on the western side. I think we're talking about the same one, but you know, we can go over there and check. But I've walked that path off the path in both directions and haven't seen any other thing under that emergency path. So I learned a couple of things the other day that sort of raised questions. One is that there seems to be some insufficient thing there, and maybe an 18-inch drain would take care of that under the path, and that would alleviate some of the pressure. But the other thing is that there is sometimes a block at the railroad of Heron Creek, and even if the new subdivision Silverleaf drains to the northwest and doesn't, you know, come back over that road. You know, what happens if the water backflows from the railroad crossing back and creates, the same problem we're having now with, any added water from the new subdivision. And maybe the 1 inch rule that Pat was talking about is what we, is the answer to that. Like, it's not likely to add a whole lot more water, but that would be a concern. So really, we have two concerns that seem to be the problem now: the way the way the water goes under the path, and then further blocking of the Heron Creek at the railroad crossing. I don't know.
Yes, I can answer that in part. Oh, I think I can answer all of it. First of all, the railroad crossing. The railroad crossing is an old concrete structure. It's unlikely that it can be rebuilt. We just have to, the railroad is in charge of it. They're not likely to change it. It's stable. It's a lot of cement under there, and the volume of it is fixed. And it is a bottleneck. To the south of that crossing, the water runs from the south to the north, and from the south of that crossing, there are a lot of new impervious, including I-96 highway system dumps water in there, and it's all increased the volume over time. That did not flood years and years ago. The water might have backed up from the river in there, and there's in certain severe cases, but it is a bottleneck and it does cause flooding. But that's almost impossible for us to alleviate unless we drill new holes and put new crossings underneath the railroad tracks. To touch that old concrete one would be almost a disaster. I'm afraid if we touch it, it'll fall apart. But you'll have to, it's a mess, and you can't shut the railroad down. I have drilled under 3 railroads now in the last 20 years, and it is not easy to do. And the railroads have their own little restriction about not making their trains wobble and top and all that kind of stuff. And you have to really be careful to do that. And there's a lot of liability doing that. The fact of the matter is that we're going to have to live with the space underneath that trestle. And that's it. That's the volume that we have to push water through. If all new developments in any rebuilding of any old drains within that system to the south of those railroad tracks is aimed at reducing the overall volume off the land, then you'll see an improvement in the flooding over time. And that's our goal.
Will that, will the extra water come into your determination about 1 or 2 inches when you, study the problem?
Yes, we'll model that. And we have specific models for that. The other problem is that the sanitary system for the township used to run north of Mount Hope. It ran behind those properties, and that created the Heron Creek to back up under the railroad trestle, the railroad tube or structure that's underneath there. It's not really a tube, but you can imagine that water would back up 3 or 4 feet just because of those sanitary pipes. Now the township has then reconstructed those pipes to go through Mount Hope, and they are now not part of a problem. So we've opened up and saved about 3 feet of water downstream of the railroad trestle, which means the water gets away faster. If you go down Mount Hope, you'll see where we rebuilt that entrance underneath the crossing on the south side, and the creek going to the floodplain area to the north side. The problem is that the river, when it backs up all the way across Mount Hope. The water just comes from the river, and we haven't had a 100-year storm yet on the Red Cedar watershed, and it'll come at some point. The 1975 flood was the equivalent of about a 40-year event, which is less than half of what a 100-year storm would be, if you can remember that. I don't know if you were around back then or not, but that was the largest flood that we've had in a long time. That backed up water completely south of the railroad tracks. That was all flooded back there, back in 1975. So, but as new development comes along, I guess I want to say, to answer your question, it will become better and better with each new drain improvement that we do. Our goal is to hold more water on the land and put less in the system, because we have to make up for the past 100 years of development. And that's the only way that we can do it, is one little drain at a time and one development at a time. I'm not anti-development or anything like that. And then it's up to the township to actually decide whether they want to develop these lands. But what they should do, and they do, the township's been very helpful in working with us to make sure that we can improve the water flow off these lands with each new development.
So the
That
other
help?
thing, yeah, it does. The other thing I learned that was really interesting to me, and I suspect would be interesting to the other residents who are on this this Zoom, who are within the district, is that in order for the current drain that goes under that emergency path to be addressed, there has to be a petition that's signed by 5 people, and that will set into motion a number of events that will, you know, create an assessment. Okay, what's the best way of handling this, et cetera. And then eventually, you know, some kind of idea of well, some kind of drainage assessment and how that's taken care of. My understanding of that is the first thing will be to study the problem, what it's going to take, and there might be a couple different versions of that. There might be some public comment, but that at the end, you know, there's going to be a bill for people in the drainage district to pay. Is that the correct understanding of the process?
That is correct. The township is not a city. Usually most cities like East Lansing and Lansing, they pay for all the stormwater work that's done. In the out county areas within the townships, the residents all share in the costs. Of course, the tax load that on your personal property, your ad valorem tax is lower in the township than it would be if you were in a city. And there is part of the difference. The responsibility for stormwater infrastructure is in part for purposes of health and safety is the township's portion, usually 10, 15, 20%, something like that. And the residents who use and actually put water in the drain, the property owners, their properties are then assessed for the volumes that they have an equal share in contributing to.
Okay. And so everybody within that area that Alan showed earlier within that drain district would be those, I think the code says, you know, all who are impacted by the drain.
That's
everybody
right.
within that black area around there. So does it look like part of that area was the new Silverleaf? How does that work?
Well, you're talking about the new development?
Yeah, the new development, their drainage is going to go to the northwest, but part of that new development is within that area that Alan had mapped out.
That's right. They will be assessed at whatever whatever land use they're going to wind up being. An example, I had on a drain project that we did about 15 years ago in Williamston. There's a large landowner next to the highway that had his property zoned industrial. Well, he went out and hired somebody to plant corn and made an argument to me that it was agricultural, so his assessment should be less. But the reality is that he had signs up saying industrial land, you know, and it was zoned industrial. And we know what the purpose of that land is going to be. So the building of this infrastructure has to meet the needs of those properties for 100 years. You know, they can't just build them today and for short-term usage. We have to plan sometime over a 100-year period, and we understand that that's going to be residential for a long time to come. And we have to build the drain to meet those drainage needs and to accommodate the public health, safety, and welfare of the people that live there based upon their desire to use that land. And I believe that they're asking for a rezoning or they're about ready to get one or whatever, but I understand what they want to do there. As long as they want to do that, it doesn't matter whether they have a zoning classification or not. I know what their use is going to be, so I will assess them accordingly. Okay.
So just to add, Pat, that if they're still in the drainage district, because if they're not going to the Hoskins, they can petition our office to be removed from the Hoskins drainage district. And so they can be have their lands added only to the Heron Creek. So that could be an outcome here if they're no longer, if they're not using the Hoskins drain. Right now they're in the district, and at least partially the land is in the district. It would be anticipated they would use the Hoskins drain to get over the Heron Creek, but when they develop their land, they may have a different drainage plan. So we'll have to wait and see how that shakes out.
Just to make it clear to everybody, the drain office has not seen the final version of their plan. If they want to remove themselves from the Hoskin Creek or put everything in a Heron Creek from the drainage district they're in, then they will have to go through a process in our office to be removed. And that would be part of the site plan review that we would look at, and we would consult with the township to make sure that everybody's on board with what's going on.
Yeah,
But that would leave a smaller pool of people to pay for the petition.
right, and you can see that that's sort of, you know, an important point when I would imagine when residents are thinking about whether they're going to initiate a process by doing this petition, they're probably looking to the end as to how is the payment going to be shared among how many people. Right. So, like, the border of that black was kind of interesting, but it sounds like what Carla's saying, that could change if there's a petition to be removed.
That's right. And then there's something else. It's not just the putting of that pipe in the ground either. There are other problems within the system that have to be looked at. And if we do a petition, we have to look at that whole system and find all the things that are wrong with it and fix them all at one time. And I don't know what the price tag of all that would be, but we would have an engineer look at it and give us a preliminary study.
So when a petition process is initiated, it goes, the whole shebang is looked at and addressed accordingly, and then assessed. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's important to remember that this infrastructure is there for 100 years, and we have to make sure that it's up to date. This has already been there since the 1880s, and it's been there over 100 years, and it hasn't had any major increases to its quality, obviously. We're going to have to upgrade it. So, and I don't like building drains that don't last more than 100 years. So the infrastructure should be that long lasting.
And did I understand correctly from the other day that the cost, the bill for all the work that would be done is not necessarily equally assessed to every household within the district? Sometimes are charged more and some less. Is that accurate, or did I misunderstand that?
Yes, the assessment is based upon benefit derived. And benefit derived can be interpreted a variety of different ways. For example, the roads, they run off at a different rate than do somebody's front lawn. Somebody's front lawn runs off at a different rate than a parking lot. Parking lots tend to be a 0.9 runoff factor, which means 90 gallons out of every 100 wind up in the drain. Residential lots are between 3 and 4 gallons of water tend to stay on their land, or excuse me, runoff, and 6 or 7 gallons stay on the land. I mean, it soaks into your lawn or in your garden or something like that. So it's based upon runoff and how much water you actually put in the drain. And land use, the zoning part of land use that the township then places on them is the first place that we look. Now, not all properties that are used according to a certain zoning are equal. There are some developments that run off very little water. They have cisterns in the basement and so on and so forth. We take all that into consideration. So, and each assessment can be different. Like 25 years from now, you can have a different value that's put on it because there might have been some land use changes that took place in between some minor improvement 20 years from now after we get done putting this in.
Can I jump in here for a second? We have a police community forum going on tonight, and I want to switch over to that. I want to say a couple of things. One, thank you, Peter, for putting this together. Two, thank you to the neighbors for being here. I know that it's easy in today's world, especially with what's going on in today's world, to distrust government. As we've told you from the start, you can trust us to do the right thing. And we've made a lot of commitments, and we're going to follow through with each of those. And if you ask the neighborhoods that we've dealt with in the previous 5 or 7 years, and you look back and talk to them, you'll find out that's true. If you look at what we did with the police and fire millage 4 years later, everything that we said we've done. And the first year after the road millage, everything we said we'll do. But I have to tell you one last thing. I am amazed, Pat and Carla. I've now sat through 2 of your sessions, and I find out what I really don't know. And I'm amazed at the knowledge and talent that you both have. I mean, I know I think I paid 3 or 4 assessments at my house. So we need to talk about that. But anyway, the knowledge that you have about every railroad tie and every creek and every this, it's amazing. And I really appreciate what you do in your office. You're very responsive. So thank you very much, and carry on and trust us to do the right thing. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And you've been good partners.
Appreciate it. I don't know. Is there anything else from the neighborhood or Peter?
Okay. I'm going to move on then, if there's no more questions for me.
So,
or are there?
I don't know. I was trying to ask Peter.
I don't know if it's my connection that's bad or somebody else's, but I'm having trouble hearing the question.
I guess, are there any more questions for my staff or myself?
Yeah. Thanks, Pat. Sorry, I think I got waylaid by Wi-Fi traffic or something. So there's 2 more questions on we've got Lawrence, Drzal, and Norman again. And I think for just out of respect for everybody's time, we'll take their questions and we'll try to wrap this thing up. I'm sure everybody wants to eat dinner and move on with their nights before work again tomorrow. So let me just call up Lawrence first, and then Norman, and then any other questions, if there are, however the conversation goes, we could always either reconvene, or you could take some of these questions offline to the drain directly. So let me work through my DJ magic here and put Lawrence back on. Okay, Lawrence, be sure to unmic yourself and you're back on with us. If you could share your question with the team,
just a
we'll
quick
address
question.
it.
Just a quick question. We've talked about this petition. What's the process? How does it start? Where do I find out information about it?
I can give you a little information about that. Our office will give you a petition paper, and it'll state the purpose of the petition and the drain name and everything, but it's up to the citizens to get 5 people to sign it, and they have to be 5 freeholders. And then after the petition is submitted, we verify the signatures, and then there is a public hearing set. It's called a board of determination. And there are 3 people that are picked from communities outside of Meridian Township that have no relatives in the district, or they have no dog in this hunt. They have no prejudice against or for or anything like that. And they listen to the citizens who are petitioning for the drain and make a determine whether or not it is necessary to move forward with improvements. Now, that's up to the citizens to make their argument that they want improvements to happen. Prior to that meeting, though, we will have our engineers take a hard look at the system, and we can come up with a kind of a temporary list that we come up with of improvements that need to happen, because we can see the failure in the system. And then after the board of necessity or the board of determination happens, then the board of determination orders the drain commissioner, in this case me, to make the improvements. And it doesn't tell me how to do it or anything like that. So we will work closely with the neighborhood to figure out where the problems are, and we will make the drain whole again so that it functions, so that everybody's satisfied with the outcome. That is the process. And then there's another hearing at the end of that to see who pays for it.
Great. It sounds like a great process. Thank you.
And Pat, one
Thanks.
thing is you normally hold scope meetings, which aren't required by the drain code, but that you like to do so that you have a dialogue with the watershed or the drainage district about before we go to a project to talk about the options and maybe you want to.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll speak to that. The scope hearings for me are very important because what they do, you know more about the land. You live there. I don't live there, you know. So you know it than I do, and you know more about it than my engineers do. So the little quirky behaviors and water movements and ecosystems that exist within your watershed are all important to you, and we want to know what they are. So that we can build a drain which becomes useful to the neighborhood and to all the participants within that drainage district that use the drain. We certainly don't want to go in there and build some monster drain that's going to hurt everything. The volume control and all of that kind of things we'll talk about at the scope hearing. And the scope hearing will also produce a lot of new information from landowners that my engineers can then use to design outfall sizes, pipe sizes, invert elevations, and so on and so forth. And some of the improvements may include street work. We have sometimes catch basins that collapse, and we have depressions and streets sink and so on and so forth. And all of those things, we can find those things out and try to make a plan that can address all of those things. In the end, you should have a completely replumbed watershed, basically, which meets your needs and your future criteria for being a neighborhood, basically. And it's designed to help the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood is the bottom line.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, Norm, let's this up and load. Okay, Norman, you should have the ability to speak here.
There we go.
There you go. We can hear you. Do you have any final questions for the team here?
There. Is that better?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I put these questions in chat, but real quickly, I wanted to reiterate that lowering the drain pipe under the pathway will not solve the whole problem. There are other constrictions to the flow of water other than the pipe under the pathway. So that's point number one. The water behind Aztec Road or between Aztec and Sophia Way will still be ponded, because there is another constriction within the system that's holding that ponded water. Secondly, the person who actually owns the property that consists largely of ponded water is a lawyer in Lansing who bought that property from when Craig Sturck did not pay his drain fees, oddly enough, and it went to tax auction. And this person bought that property, which is a pretty good sized piece of property. And it does make me wonder if that isn't something that perhaps the Land Conservancy might want to try and buy from this person. He only paid about $1,000 for it because it was a tax auction. And he has offered it for sale to people in the neighborhood. No one has bought it because they don't see the value of owning ponded water. But if purchasing that property might help with construction of a new drain, that might be something that someone should consider. At any rate,
Sure.
You might look into that.
Well, they're very good suggestions, and we'll keep all of that in mind. If a petition does come in, we will take a look at all of those different options, and then we'll be in communication with the neighborhood again, either individually or as a group meeting like this. We'll have some kind of a scope hearing to go over what we found in our investigations. Okay.
Very good, and thank you very much.
You're welcome very much.
Thanks, Norman. Okay, well, I'm thinking we're going to wrap this up. We appreciate everybody being here tonight. I think a lot of good information, probably some of it over my head, but that's okay. I'm not the one doing the work on this part. So I echo everything Frank said tonight. I hope what we've been able to show is that the township staff and drain commissioner staff is heavily engaged in this process, and that we're following up on the rezoning conditions that were approved earlier this year. So that was the main goal tonight, and there are resources at hand to deal with these questions and situations that are going to come up in the future. So this doesn't have to be the end of this conversation. It does tonight, but we're all here, so I did see a hand, but it disappeared very quickly. So if we're all in agreement, let's call it a night, and can always take this up again another day. So hopefully you all have my contact information. I'm happy to be a conduit between township, drain office staff, and other team members here. So tell your neighbors. We did record the meeting, so we'll throw this up on YouTube if anybody wants to check it out that weren't able to attend tonight. So again, thanks for attending, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.